everyone. Good to be with you all. My name is John Fink, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you to ONCAT for the invitation, and thank you for you all for the excellent sessions already this morning. I am learning a ton coming up from New York City, studying transfer in the US, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to get your firsthand perspective of your work with transfer students in Ontario. It's just really fascinating. So I'm learning a ton. I have some slides and a presentation to share here, really around this idea of dismantling barriers and taking collective responsibility for transfer success. This is based on our research in the States. And so, I want to save some time for discussion and Q&A at the end to think about, similarities and differences, of course, across our contexts. But it's also, I should say, it's really nice to be here because I was at an ONCAT conference in 2017. That was also a really memorable and fun experience learning what's happening in Ontario. And that was before kids, before gray hairs, and it's really good to be back in Toronto. So the question I want us all to think about, because in the States, a common sort of refrain is for transfer students, advising transfer students is, well, is the student ready to transfer? Are they transfer ready? Is the student ready? I want us to think about, are we ready for transfers? Because they're coming. And they've been coming, and they're coming in all directions, right? From colleges to universities, and from other universities to colleges, and all of that. So let me just tell you about where I work. It's a research center, the Community College Research Center. It's based at Teachers College, a part of Columbia University in New York City. We're going on 25 years now, studying community colleges across the country. And I joined CCRC about 10 years ago. And before that, I worked directly with community college transfers to a large public flagship university, and I was in the student affairs, and working with community college transfers right after they arrived. And our leaders really recognized that community college transfers, they kind of came in, midway through their bachelor's degree, and they weren't always getting access to like the leadership development opportunities, the study abroads, the student government. So they were trying to create a place and a space within student affairs to really provide that to transfer students. And I think we did a good job, but I also got to see firsthand what some of those challenges were for those transfer students. Like they were oftentimes having their first meeting with an advisor talking about how their credits were going to transfer and apply to their bachelor's degree, like right at the point of orientation. And so we would run this like ice cream social with peer mentors and a panel of transfer students. And it was right after they were kind of coming in from those advisor appointments and learning that, well, I guess I got accepted to the university, but not the College of Business. And I guess my B in calculus from the community college, which should have got me into the business major, that wasn't counted because I needed a B in calculus from the university, not from the college. And so we were dealing with a lot of those challenges and, trying to give folks support, but it just really kind of got me passionate and fired up about research for advocacy on improving transfer systems. And transfer systems are, complex and important and to, broadening access to bachelor's degrees and economic opportunity. And so just to kind of give some key takeaways from our research looking at this across the US. First is that transfer has really always been a promise, an opportunity for a more affordable and accessible pathway to a bachelor's degree for entering community college students, but it's largely an unmet promise, and it has disproportionate impacts on the communities that could really benefit the most. We've really focused on what are the barriers that institutions, that colleges and universities create for students that can be sort of removed. And oftentimes there's been this analogy to like a leaky pipeline, but I kind of like the analogy of a supply chain. Partially because we were thinking a lot about this during the pandemic. Do you all remember like the supply chain crisis? What was that boat that got stuck in the canal? And you remember that? So I like this supply chain metaphor because it puts the ownership on us as educators to take responsibility for student success. If you think about a big company like Apple that has these global supply chains, that they're really thinking about every part of their own supply chain and making sure that that is ship shape, ready to go. It's not like they're saying, oh, well, we'll just wait till we get the parts and then we'll make our phones. No, they're taking responsibility for the whole supply chain. And I think that we can think similarly about talent development, regional economic growth, and transfer as a key part of that. And so I'll show you some slides. And basically in the States, transfer outcomes are really low and inequitable. It's not working well. The good news is that it is working well in some places. And some partnerships and some universities and colleges have figured it out. They have stronger outcomes. So a lot of our research over the last 5 years is focused on studying effective partnerships and practices, identifying places with strong outcomes, and visiting them to learn what they're doing. So that's what I'm here to share. And also just say, there's lots of I've been talking with folks in the halls just around what are the incentives to do anything different? Because, I think I would suspect that a lot of folks in this room sort of know what needs to be done, but it's about resources, priority, getting this on people's agenda and time. And so how do we sort of think about the incentives and the case that we can make, the business case, the sort of equity or social justice case, and the case for economic development. So I think that there are some encouraging sort of growing incentives for doing this work. Okay, so let's first start by thinking about the community college transfer. So I know transfer is kind of happening in all different directions. My research is really focused on the vertical transfer route or the college to university transfer pathway, because this in the States has been significant for broadening access to bachelor's degrees, which we found lead to a whole range of positive benefits, at least in the US, in terms of economic outlooks, health benefits, wealth, closing the racial wealth gap. So we really focus on broadening access and increasing bachelor's degree attainment as a North Star of this research. And so the first thing that we look at is just transfer networks are very complex. So this is actually a visualization of transfer patterns in one large state in the US, where the community colleges are the sort of blue dots, and the four-year or the universities are the sort of small gray dots. And this is just one large state, and it's really only showing the pathway of college to university, not all the other swirls that are happening. And even still, this kind of looks like a bowl of spaghetti. It's just very complex. There's a lot of universities. So colleges are having to sort of figure out all these different pathways to all these different partners, and it's really just complicated. It's logistically challenging, and I think that's one of the major barriers a lot of time. But another part of the opportunity here is that despite our low outcomes and despite the complexity in the system, about half of bachelor's degree graduates in the US have some prior community college enrollment. And a large and growing, as I'll sort of allude to at the end, chunk of that is happening in high school. So we have this really large and growing trend of high school students taking community college courses that then become transfer students sort of de facto after high school. But as you can see, community colleges do have a big role in contributing to bachelor's degree production in the US. But when we look at sort of entering cohorts of new community college students, so we've been tracking this every year, initially since I was here in 2017, we've been just looking at these same outcomes. How many new community college students do we have in the States? It's about 600,000 or 700,000 new for the first time in post-secondary degree-seeking students. We know from our survey research that about 80% of these students intend to earn a bachelor's or graduate degree. So students are really coming into community colleges in the States with high degree aspirations. They want a bachelor's degree. But when we look over a 6-year period of time, we find that about a third of students ever enroll at a university or four-year institution. Most students are not completing before they transfer. So for the students who do transfer, they sort of jump ship kind of early, after the first year or two. They are not completing at the community college. And then if you look over a 6-year period of time, it's fewer than 1 in 5 of these entering community college students are winding up with a bachelor's degree. So that's a big drop off. And if you look at this number and see what's the disproportionate impact for Black students and Hispanic students and other sort of minoritized communities in the US, we see that there's this disproportionate impact, and transfer is really just not working well for the students who could benefit the most. So well, we've done research to look at this by state. So, okay, those are the national outcomes. Maybe there's some states that are just doing this really well. And there are some, Illinois, New Jersey, Maryland, Florida, but really everyone is pretty low. It's still about 1 in 5 entering community college students. There's not like one state that is just totally knocking it out of the park. Generally, there's low. And what's interesting, that we just released this today, our Federal Department of Education last week released new data on institution-level transfer outcomes. And what we see is there's a lot of variation like within states. And so there's sort of a lot of information here. It's a little nerdy. You can see this on our website later if you'd like. But basically, all of these dots are different universities and their bachelor completion rates for community college transfers. And so you see some state-by-state differences, but the much larger finding is that within state, there's a lot of variation. Like in Texas, you have some 30% completion rates and others up to like 80 or 90. So this really kind of gets us curious about like, well, let's look at the stars and the slugs, sometimes what we've called it. So the stars, higher performers, slugs, really low outcomes. And what I'm highlighting here are for-profit institutions in the US, our private for-profits. You can see that you have some larger bubbles here, more students, that's the size of the bubble, and pretty low completion rates, 10 or 20%. So I think one thing that's sort of emerging is that a lot of our low outcomes, I think, are being driven by some large low performers, more for-profit institutions, as well as some large, primarily online, not private, nonprofit institutions. But let's focus on the positive. So you do see that there are some universities that have really strong outcomes. Here's an example from Texas, Texas A&M, College Station. In this one cohort of students, there was almost 500 community college transfers, and 85% of them graduated with a bachelor's. So I think this really motivates this question of like, well, what's going on in College Station? Like, is there something there that we can, is that like a secret sauce? Is there something in the water? Can we like learn from them and try to replicate? And that's what our research is focused on. But before we get to that, I want to just sort of go over what we've learned about the barriers that transfer students encounter in the States. And, I think all of these publications we released since 2017. And so we've really, first we did this national outcomes showing that the outcomes were so low. And then we did a lot of follow-up research within states to understand like where is this not working? Like where's the supply chain breaking down? Where's that giant ship in the canal? And here's what we've learned. First, coming in to college, most students are not provided any support or assistance from colleges, let alone universities, to explore their options, build a plan for transfer, and their progress isn't monitored. And so part of what's hard about this is that the pathways and options students have are pretty unclear, and there's a lot of potential like directions that students could take. And so I think, and in our community colleges are typically very underfunded compared to universities, and they just don't have the advising staff to do this well. So you have colleges with, advisors are supposed to be seeing like 800 students every year, maybe 1,000. It's just unreasonable to expect that they will be able to do that well. And in fact, most transfer intending students, like about half of them, never speak to the transfer advisor or never seek out the transfer advising services. I heard this in one of the sessions before on the survey of the transfer student experience. I think it was like, pretty large numbers of students are just Googling stuff. They're just sort of like going on websites, which I gotta say, there's some great examples from ONCAT and others about trying to make this clearer. I think that's a smart call because students are just trying to figure this out on their own. Sometimes I've called it like a DIY transfer pathway. And as much as I love a good craft project, I don't think that this is something that we should be expecting of our students to figure out a very complex system. And so the paths are unclear, and what we often tell students in the States is just start taking courses, you'll figure it out later, get your gen eds out of the way, we hope this works out for you down the line, but then not with any real follow-up on that. And if you've ever tried to just figure out your own transfer pathway from your website, like from the perspective of a student, try to do it on your phone, to a local partner, it's harder than you think to figure out like what courses you actually need to take to get into that major for the bachelor's. The other big issue we're having in the community colleges in the States is that students enter community college and they're often placed into pretty generic, abstract, and not well taught courses, like in math and English, that are not even college level courses. They're like more like prerequisite, developmental. And so there's been a lot of reforms around this, but this still is a huge challenge and barrier in the pipeline. And for transfer and transfer credit, you do really have to question, like the university I worked at, I never understood why business majors needed to have calculus as the requirement instead of statistics, or biology majors needed to have calculus instead of statistics, when every other university that wasn't like the selective elite college in the state for business or biology, it was statistics. And so we set up these like 2 different tracks for business or biology intending students in the state I worked in. One's the go to the flagship track and good luck in calculus, which I hope you just like inherently. Maybe there are people who just inherently like calculus. I'm not one of them. But it's basically not relevant to like what they're trying to do. There's no application there. And so I think that we oftentimes weed out. These are like sorting mechanisms, and they sort by race and class and other factors. And so I think we need to take a hard look at the courses and the requirements, and is this really, what is required of these programs? Okay. Another barrier is after the point of transfer. If you sort of make it to that point, students that I worked with at the university, and that this happens in other places too, oftentimes don't feel welcomed when they get to the university. Many times the community colleges are smaller, they have more sort of supports, they might be more minority serving, and you go to universities, it's a little bit more, it's whiter, it's higher income, there's not as many supports, and so there just is this sense of belonging and connection, and there can be a lack of a receptive culture, which creates another sort of barrier for students. And then finally, there's just, although there's a ton of high school students in the States taking college courses, most places are not thinking about that strategically as an on-ramp to a bachelor's degree. Okay, so how do students experience all of this? Well, it's confusing, there's little help, it takes extra time, they're not actually saving the money they thought they would be. Information, you're getting different information from different sources. Advisors are well-meaning, but it's just overwhelmed. And I think what's most disappointing is that oftentimes students will blame themselves. I should have known. I should have known that, these colleges and university are more like in competition with each other, and they're not like working for my best interests. And so that's telling them maybe what they've already been hearing throughout their lives. I'm not university material. I should have known. I've always thought, I don't know if folks read The Onion, it's sort of like a joke. So I worked in transfer orientation. How many folks run a transfer student orientation or welcome to transfer? So yeah, I always thought this was funny because it's college still looking for absolute saddest place on campus to hold their transfer student orientation. We had a good one. I mean, we had ice cream, we had the student panel, but oftentimes transfer students feel like, second class on university campuses. But this is changing, and it's not happening everywhere. And I know you all are the ones really leading the charge to elevate transfer and make it more visible. And from the university perspectives, transfer students are great students. This is what we've learned. This is a study that we did in Virginia. We asked, are transfer students just a good bet from the admissions perspective? And absolutely. We sort of matched transfer students to their similar non-transfer students with similar grades and other sort of background characteristics, just to see how well did they perform. They tended to do better. They had higher grades. They completed at higher rates. Sort of retention is tuition, right? So it's this is a good bet. The transfer students, and we've always heard from decades this idea of transfer shock. Oh, the transfer student's going to come here and then their grades are going to tank because it's so much harder in our rigorous courses. So what we've found is, there is a little bit of a transfer shock, yes, but it's well, who are you comparing it to? So we looked, this is kind of technical, but what we looked is the red line are transfer students. The blue line are other comparative students who aren't transfers. The yellow line in the middle is when they transferred. And what we see is that transfer students were doing really well in terms of their grades, and that there was a shock upon the point of transfer, but it was down to like the level of their peers. So there's a drop, but like just more like down to the other students. And then they kind of came back from that, and they overperformed the non-transfer students. So transfer students, a good bet for admissions, absolutely. These are great students. So I want to talk a little bit about credit transfer. Our federal government did a study nationally. The big headline was that 43% of credits are just lost in the process of transfer. I think I just swallowed a bug. It's particularly worse to the private institutions, but even to our public four-year institutions, about 1 in 5 credits were just lost to transfer. And so we're focused on this here. We know this is an issue for students, money and financial aid and all that, but I want to make the point that another piece of research, nationally representative from the states, found that credit transfer, having most of your credits transfer, was one of the most predictive things of actually completing the bachelor's degree. So yes, credit transfer is important for sort of economic reasons, but in terms of just actual likelihood of completing, credit transfer is really significant too. So credit mobility, by which we mean not just transferability, but is it going to apply to the degree program, really matters. But it doesn't work well, it's a broken system, and it affects those who can least afford it. This is one of our studies in a large state in the US, which typically bachelor's degrees require like 120 credits. And so we looked at college transfers who completed a bachelor's, and on average, they took 147 credits. Again, 120 are required. So this is like a whole other year. They're just like fully doing a 5th year to get that 4-year degree. And then if you sort of look at who this is affecting, it's especially affecting Black students, Native students, low income, and students who complete the associate degree for transferring are sort of completing more credits. And I think this really raises questions for us around how well are our transfer programs designed to have all those credits transfer. All right, so I don't want to dwell on this because I don't know how much this is like sort of US specific, but one big problem we have is that students will come in here in the Maricopa Community Colleges in Arizona wanting to transfer, and they kind of get put into these generic programs like the general transfer program. And it really raises the question, like, is it clear to students like what they're pursuing, what's their pathway? And if it's just like a general program, like what motivation do these students have to continue in terms of like what this is leading to? And this is why we've really studied this idea of early momentum, because the 6-year outcomes are really low. We've found that those low outcomes in the 6 years and those gaps in performance, they show up right away in the first year. And so if we can close those gaps early on, we can close them in the long term. And I'm going to show you another piece of data here from a large Midwestern state just across the lake here. What we've done is we've tracked what programs these students were enrolled in for their first 2 years. And the first thing I want to point out is that only about half of new community college students are just coming back at all in the first year. So we have enrollment challenges, but we're losing half of the students after the first year. That's like a huge starting point. And then about 40% are entering into general transfer. So I think it really raises a question like, well, what's the motivation to come back if it's not leading to something of value? So we've studied these early momentum metrics, things like are students completing a certain number of credits in their first year? Are they passing college math and English? And we've shown that these are predictive of longer term transfer outcomes. And one thing that we've done based on some work in states that have convened panels of faculty like in disciplines to say, okay, for students who want to transfer and get a bachelor's in chemistry, what should be the correct sequence of courses in the pre-major courses to ensure that they're gonna apply to that chemistry degree? And we found that, sure enough, students, when they take that set of courses that the faculty recommended, they're much more likely to complete in those fields. And we focus this on STEM fields. And so I think the sort of coordination and pathway development work is so important. And if we can get students we're working with advisors to take those courses that are on the pathway. You really do see that sort of returning in terms of their completion in the long term. And here, I'm sort of going through a little bit quick because I want to get to our field research. Essentially, this idea of momentum, it has a general benefit in terms of transfer and bachelor completion. This is another state study, but the effects were even larger for Black and Hispanic and low-income students, which are sort of disproportionately impacted by complex transfer. And so I think this, again, just reinstates the point that if we want to make improvements on longer-term outcomes, close racial equity gaps on these longer-term outcomes, we need to do it right away, early on for students, where we first see that sort of attrition and those gaps present. All right, so at this point, you might be thinking, all right, so what does this mean for our work? And these are some questions that we use to thinking for colleges, for community colleges. Are we asking and monitoring students' transfer intentions and aspirations coming in? Do we help students build a plan for transfer? Or is transfer advising more on the tail end? Often, the phrase I keep hearing is that transfer advising is oftentimes too little, too late, and really absent the involvement of the university. For universities, instead of waiting for transfer students to come to you, one of the universities I was talking to over lunch said half of their students were transfers. And yet, oftentimes that people might not know that. So instead of just sort of taking for granted this large population, what can universities do to reach out and make sure that they're ready for transfers? So just want to speak a little bit to the incentives for rethinking from are students ready to transfer to are we ready for transfer? In the States, enrollment is a huge incentive. So this is the trend with the blue line being community college enrollments over the last 20 years. And the big takeaway here is that even before the pandemic, which we lost about 1 million students out of the community colleges in the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, it was trending down. And that's true at the 4 years to some extent. 4-year institutions really lost a lot in their transfer enrollment. The universities, they had large shares of transfer students, and their transfer enrollments were down double digits. So everybody's kind of hurting. And at this point, it's sort of coming back a little bit, but we're starting from a very deep hole. And so everybody's just, the sending and receiving institutions, the colleges and the universities are really sort of, should be motivated to really rethink, we can't lose, not only should we be trying to find new students, but we can't lose the students that we already have at our institutions. I'm sure this never happens here in Ontario, but the partnerships I've worked with in the States, the colleges and universities, they might sort of squabble over students, sort of fighting over those college-bound students. And this was an example from one site visit that we did where the community college and university were looking at, how many students are transferring in this partnership, so to this particular university, and how many students are transferring elsewhere. Basically, the university was trying to be send us more students. Why are you prioritizing your partnerships with these other universities? We're gonna do all this great stuff. We'll offer guarantees. We'll sort of give the special treatment to your students. Send more of your transfers to us. And they were really focused on these two slices of the pie, the slice that we're getting to our university and the slice that are going to another university. And what they were missing out on was all the other students that never transferred because they stopped out, dropped out, or whatever. And it was a much bigger slice of the pie. And if you think about, this is just who's enrolled at the community college. I don't know about here, but we have a huge college access crisis just in general in the States, where only about half of high school graduates are going to any post-secondary. So that's an even bigger slice of the pie to just think about who are we not reaching? Who are the older adults out there that don't have any post-secondary that we could engage? And I think that this, in the sort of context of competition, taking a step back and thinking about who's not just being served at all and how do we find those as an access point is a really key strategy. Okay. I want to go over what we learned from those outliers that had stronger outcomes in the States for community college transfers. So what we did in this project with the Aspen Institute is with our national data, we essentially ranked pairs of sending and receiving institutions, community colleges and universities. We ranked them on how many students were going between them and what were those students' bachelor's completion rates. And we visited 6 sites across the country that had the highest outcomes, the most throughput of transfer students to a bachelor's degree. And you can see, we saw across different state contexts. We visited private institutions, public institutions, and we basically met with leaders from those places. We met with students, we met with faculty, met with counselors, advisors, and we just sort of asked them, why do you think you have stronger outcomes? What explains this? And we really tried to focus on the components that were replicable outside of their setting. And we had these sort of 3 key findings. This is all written up, sort of publicly accessible in our transfer playbook, much more detailed findings with sort of tools to help assess your own institutional practices against these findings. But I'll talk through these sort of 3 key points here. Prioritizing transfer student success, creating clear program pathways with aligned instruction, and providing tailored transfer student advising and support. So let's talk first about making this a priority. A key thing here is about making transfer a president level priority. So just think about that. Like, do we have any college or university presidents here? All right. So you all get it. So in the States, like the president of the university, of a college or university, and I'm talking especially about the universities here, they have a lot of sway and in terms of setting a vision, allocating resources, and just marshaling support for transfer efforts. And so if we want to improve these outcomes, this needs to be the top priority. And for community colleges, this makes a lot of sense. It's a key part of their mission. I think 4-year institutions, universities are recognizing that this is a way to broaden and diversify enrollments, to serve their communities, and also it's really just an enrollment strategy. So I think there's a lot of reasons why this should be a priority, but it's not always a sort of a president level priority. The second strategy here is around creating programmatic pathways. I know there's been a couple sessions on this here today, which is really awesome. Like I should say, I'm really inspired to learn from your work on how you're aligning the more applied diploma programs to the bachelor's degree, which I think in the States, it's like we should have this figured out. Like our associate degrees are supposed to be the gen ed to transfer to the bachelor's, and yet we still have all these issues. Like the sort of shenanigans of it's a 200 level course on Shakespeare at the community college. It's a 300 level course on Shakespeare at the university. It's taught by the same adjunct instructor. But we're going to count that as a free elective and not towards the major. So there's all sorts of kind of monkey business that goes on with this. So what we see in places that do this well is the faculty and the department, the academic folks from the university talk to the faculty and the academic folks from the college. They get together. They have a lot of things in common. They're interested in the same subjects. Maybe they went to the same graduate programs. But when they get together, they build trust. They're sort of aware of what they're each teaching. And not only do they figure out the right courses and sequences of articulations, that's of course very important, but they have other conversations around instruction. Like one thing that came up the other day is just like calculator use in math classes. Like basically when are students expected not to use a calculator anymore, or when they start using it? So those sort of things where it's like, well, if we can align on that, we're going to set students up to actually be successful. Or how the content is evaluated. Is it we do mostly essays or multiple choice? There's all these more pedagogical things that instructors will want to talk about when they get together. So I think that this is really key, building those not just course sequences, but aligning the pedagogical techniques to make sure students are going to succeed in those courses once they get to the university. All right, just an example. I know there's been really great work around like the specific pathways, and a lot of states in the U.S. have done this sort of statewide articulation. And I think our first attempt at this, like in the 2000, it was all about articulation agreements and course equivalencies, and just we'll use technology to figure out like what counts for what here, here, and here. And as anybody, Arizona State University is like a large transfer serving institution in the States. They have this like sort of grand plan. It feels like an evil plan to take over the transfer world to basically, they're like, okay, if course A from your college counts as course B from our college, and course C from this other college counts as course B at our college, then course C and course A count for each other through the transitive property of transfer credit. And now we will become the new transferology, or, you know, so they have this. So all of this equivalency, that's great. Technology, great tool for that. But the applicability of the credit, is this actually gonna reduce the time to my degree completion? Or is the university, as we did at my prior employer, just sort of counts a lot of those credits as extra electives, and then you get students graduating with 150 credits instead of 120 credits. That's not really helping anybody. So the applicability is so key, and I think that, you know, states can support this, but it really needs to get into the hands of students and advisors. And so what we've seen is a lot of these like advising sheets that will say, okay, if you're interested in business, here's the pathway, here's our top destinations. We'll give you an overview. We'll give you information about our advisors and the courses, the specific courses that you need to take. But there's a lot of these like, okay, if you want to go here, you got to do this. If you want to go to that university, you got to do this. It's a really kind of hidden knowledge, oftentimes that only advisors have. And even if we put it up on our websites, you know, only, you know, some students want to talk about this with somebody. They're going to get the advice somewhere. They're going to ask their friends. They're going to ask whoever they know that just did this. And I think, again, we're just placing all that burden on students to figure out, and it's complicated. And this is why, you know, we need this support for transfer advising to answer questions students have, like, are they going to be accepted to the four-year college? Are the credits going to count towards their major? How long is it going to take them to complete, and how much is it going to cost? And then what is this all leading to in terms of further employment? So what we're learning around advising is that, you know, it can be done in so many different ways, but students really want to talk to someone, and the front-loading those supports into onboarding is really essential. And so when we talk about onboarding, we might think about like orientation, like welcome to the college, here's our dining halls, here's the facilities, here's how you sign into the software tools or whatever. But really should be onboarding into a program or onboarding into a pathway, which requires that first we ask students, what are you interested in? And we keep on asking them, because this is a developmental process. How many of you have changed your careers or changed your majors or changed your minds about something? So once we sort of have asked students, we connect them to other sort of students, other faculty, programs, events, things that they can help to explore and sort of explore those interests, be connected to a part of the college. The courses, inspiring students to sort of think about new areas that they hadn't thought about before, new pathways, new careers. And then our students actually building a plan that's showing them not just how long it's going to take and not just how many courses will they need to take, but how am I going to plan and how am I going to pay for it through my time to completion. So at the community college, we heard things like, you know, articulating transfer options, monitoring student progress, collaborating with the four-year partners. At the universities, oftentimes was just like dedicating resources to do this sort of outreach before students even get to the university. Pre-transfer advising, encouraging students to be ready to enter a major, and working with the college advisors to help students explore and enter a program of study. So I want to leave you with some ideas for getting started. A lot of which I think is already happening, like backwards mapping paths to the entry point at the colleges, helping students develop a plan, monitoring progress, just looking at your own outcomes, disaggregating that to see, you know, okay, overall maybe it's this, but who's really not being well served, that we need to add additional resources to sort of close gaps. And finally, I don't know how relevant this is here in this context, but I do just want to share that a major sort of new emerging trend in the States is just the large number of high school students taking college courses, most of which is happening through the community colleges. And this is really kind of like a lifeline at this point to community colleges across our country. So this is just looking at, age, enrollments by age, with the blue line is the community colleges. And we have like over 1 million high school students enrolled in our community colleges in the States. And this has happened at the same time that older adult enrollment, 25 plus, it has declined. I mean, we're at record lows. This is the chart all the way over on the other side. It's never been lower. I mean, this goes back to 1997, the days of the Titanic. We all remember it, I know. And like the Titanic, adult enrollment has really sunk. And so what this means for community colleges is now about 1 in 5 community college students in the States are high school students. 1 in 5. And in big states like Texas, it's 1 in 4. You got other states like Iowa, Indiana, Idaho, it's almost half of their enrollments. If you go to smaller colleges, especially smaller rural colleges, it's a third or half or more. And so I think this is, I think, I think some folks have concerns about that, but I think that this really can be an opportunity, for us to, because we have this college access crisis, these college courses in the high school have really been shown to increase college going. And so if we can kind of put them to work as a college access strategy, get students on a pathway to a bachelor's degree, a transfer pathway, before they complete high school, we're talking just the first step here, like the first 1, 2, or 3, or 4 courses to kind of explore and get started. I think it could be a transformative, taking advantage of this trend here. Okay, so we have like a whole set of resources on that in case folks want to talk more about it. Okay, so just to summarize, we're going to open it up. I want to hear your reactions. I want to hear your rebuttals. Like what translates well, like what resonates and what doesn't. But I just want to summarize this mindset shift from our students ready to transfer. This mindset where 4 years universities are just sort of waiting for students to come to them. They're working with articulation agreements that might already be out of date, collecting dust on the shelf, focused on course equivalency instead of transfer applicability, where we just make information available to students. Well, it's on our website. Didn't you see that? Or we're using our coursework more to like weed student out of majors, like I talked about with the calculus, as well as sort of a lack of intentionality around our high school outreach to this idea of, are we ready for transfers? Are we building this as a supply chain that we're having collective ownership and responsibility, helping students develop individualized plans so that they know where this is headed, how long it's gonna take, how much it's gonna cost, helping students to explore their options and connect to other students and courses and faculty that get them excited and fired up to be there and to learn. So let me just pause here. This is what I got for y'all. So what do you think? What questions do you have? I'll take applause. All right, I'll take it. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Victorina. I'm from the University of Toronto, St. George campus. I thank you for your presentation. I think it's a great point about the faculty and the involvement in transfer credit and understanding what's happening in various contexts and institutions. My question would be about the dual enrollment. I am wondering whether you have done any research to look what the number of transfer credits are given to students coming from these programs. From our practice, we recently have seen quite a substantial number of students coming from the US from these programs, and we have real challenges to understand what is happening in the context and how we can award transfer credits. The issue is that they come from US high school admitted students in the high school admitted category. They may or may not declare these courses. They may or may not show in the transcript, but when we look at them, Some of them have too many. Should we change the admission category? And then there is a question of faculty. How we assess them, because the content that is taught varies across programs. Teaching faculty may be high school teachers or university instructors and so forth. So how do we deal with the developmental enrollment and maximizing transfer credit while not over-promising?
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I have a colleague that I work with, a research assistant, Aurelie, who graduated high school in 2019 with an associate degree with 60 credits, and then continued at a university and in her home state, completed a bachelor's at 19, then came to graduate school at Teachers College, master's degree by 22, and now works on our team studying all of this. And she's called this stealth transfer. So it's like these are stealthy transfer students. They're kind of showing up as new admits, but with a ton of credits. I don't have an answer for you. I mean, I think this is a difficult, it's difficult. So I think you have to think about like, well, how would you treat like advanced placement courses that are similar or other sort of transfer credits from US community colleges could be like one way to think about it. Some universities in the States just by policy do not take any credits earned before high school. And I think that's an extreme view, but obviously every university kind of like makes their own policies. What our research on dual enrollment is really focused on is, how do we, oftentimes those credits are paid for through the states for students. And so if we're gonna spend X number of public dollars on giving high school students a jump on college, how do we get more students to have like 12 credits instead of fewer students having 60 credits? We want to like spread it around a little bit more to increase college access. So that's more like what our research is focused on, but that's not going to help you with this stream of students coming in with so many credits. So that's a big question, is what to do about that.
Hi, I'm James Brown. I'm associated with a quality assurance agency in Ontario called PICA. You asked to be challenged, and I'm not going to challenge you conceptually, but I think the Ontario situation presents a challenging situation in relationship to the kind of situation you described. So, I mean, you're normally thinking about a category called two-year colleges and a category called four-year institutions. And I'm sure you're aware that in Ontario, the rough equivalent of a two-year college is an Ontario college, which now offers also four-year degrees and has always offered two-year diplomas, three-year diplomas. And I just wondered if you would try to think out loud about the complexity of transfer in that kind of situation.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In the States, I think the similar, the analogous would be the community college baccalaureate, applied baccalaureate degree. To me, I think you heard the panel before among the sort of workforce sort of perspective. It's really like, well, what sort of education do regional economies need to grow? And what's the role of the bachelor's degree in that? And that's sort of what has been the question that we've focused on. And so then what we're seeing in a lot of our communities, I'm not exactly sure the case here, is that the growth area of like the knowledge economy and the good jobs are really bachelor's degrees. And yes, there's other good jobs from diplomas and what we call applied associates, absolutely. But and we also see very large disparities in terms of who gets access to bachelor's degrees. And so that's why our research is really focused on that. And we get this question too from the community college folks. Well, should we just, maybe a solution to improving transfer is to just really expand bachelor's degrees offered by the colleges, the community colleges. And I think it's a yes and, because what we've seen in the States is that those community college baccalaureates have really strong outcomes for students in the labor market. These are really good degrees. They're developed in partnerships with employers. They're typically like limited how many can be offered by the colleges, and and there can be some opportunity hoarding in terms of who gets access to them. So I think it's a both like just more of a, we need more bachelor's degrees, we need more sort of credentials that align to industry, and you know it's going to take all of us to sort of do that. And in this, I think that works in this context I've been aware of because there's such high attrition rates, dropout rates, stopout rates, and just questioning value of why should I go to college in the first place. Although we have a lot of post-secondary providers, there's just a ton of students that are not going or stopping to go primarily because of financial and affordability and concerns about student debt. So I'm not sure how much that translates, but I think it's ultimately about kind of economic development and trying to align the degrees to the needs regionally sort of here. So thanks for your question.
Hi, my name is Daryl Dallon. I'm from the University of Windsor, Faculty of Engineering. Similar question, I think, or along the same theme. I work in transfer space at the University of Windsor for engineering students. I also have some experience in the college space here in Ontario as well, doing the same thing. And there's a lot of challenges with misalignment because of our unique credential system, these advanced diplomas that aren't really degrees, but they're kind of like degrees, and they're very vocational focused. And there's not really what we see, especially down in Windsor, right across from the Detroit, Michigan system, and these more transfer-specific programs or transfer-specific pathways sort of thing. We're trying to merge two systems together that were never really designed to. My question is what have states done, or what could Ontario do to support overcoming some of these institutional barriers or inconsistencies or translational challenges between programs that we could possibly use and build off of?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think so one thing that's very clear and why we're all here today is just the convening power, sort of like being that sort of common voice, bringing people together, working, in sort of similar areas, like in disciplines. Like, let's get folks to think about the alignment to technology jobs or to the green economy or to, manufacturing. So I think the convening power, across so many different institutions that have various interests, that's a really key role that we've seen in the States from like state governments and other state agencies. Data, tracking, research, like bringing knowledge to the table to sort of guide that has been another key role. And oftentimes in the States, state agencies will maintain sort of like longitudinal student level data systems where you can actually then look at, well, how well is the credit transfer working in certain areas to say, again, like what's the high performers that we can learn from, which areas need more support. So those are a couple sort of ways. I mean, funding, more legislation, regulation, policy, I think has been another way, but that is really much more like kind of dependent on what's the authority and the availability of funds to invest. So something you mentioned before, just sort of taking the sort of privilege here around the complexity here of different institutional types, different levels of credentials. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm just like an optimist. I think that's really cool. Like you've got students who are going to college who are seeking a bachelor's degree because they want that sort of next level up. And then you've got students who got a bachelor's degree who are coming back to the colleges afterwards to get some extra training in more of an industry like certification or certificate or graduate certificate. So I think that's really cool. Like I don't know, again, sort of like thinking of like, what could this look like? What's the potential here? It's really like a collective effort to help students get not just the degrees, but the knowledge and the skills and the networks of people to push them forward throughout their life. Not just right after high school, but like as they go through their careers and want to change, they just have options. And so I think that figuring out ways to make that smoother for students and to know what those options are so they can sort of pursue this degree but pick up this credential and it's all in pursuit of their goals, I think is a really sort of exciting opportunity that I think where I'm coming from, most of the states that I'm working with, oftentimes it can feel very linear, like start at a community college with a goal of a bachelor's and then you're done. It feels like you do this, and then you're done, which I think what what's the potential from this more like mixing and matching approach feels more reflective of perhaps where many students and learners, just citizens, people's lives are, just kind of more as they go along. So call me an optimist, but I think that's pretty exciting to think about all the different sort of combinations to help students reach their goals. Thank you all for your questions. I'll be here for the rest of the day, and I'm really excited to continue attending sessions and keep learning from you all. So please find me if you have other questions, and thank you all for your time here.